I'm always very hesitant to offer advice to other countries because we're all dealing with the same challenges. But what I can do is give you a bit of a flavour for what we're doing in New Zealand and how it's working. New Zealanders are naturally innovative people. I think you find that around the world. What we are seeking to do is to support and encourage that innovation, particularly of the entrepreneurs that have good products and services they want to take out to the world. One of the challenges for New Zealand is a very small domestic market of 4.5 million people. So for our companies to succeed, they really do have to become exporters, to invest in other markets very quickly, much faster than, say, a country from the US or a company from the US or Canada or the UK or Brazil. So that's the challenge. So we assist in a number of ways. We try and, rather than replacing their investment, we try and support their investment. So we do not invest in research and development unless the company is putting in more than we are. That's the most important principle. So we have a series of research and development grants, but they're kept quite small, and the design is to extend the company's research and development program, perhaps take it to a more innovative and perhaps slightly riskier phase to encourage them to grow more quickly. The second thing we do is we have a series of incubators which to assist startup companies get started, and we provide, alongside private partners, small loans to those companies, which are then repayable out of their income and turnover. So it's all about, as I say, pushing alongside the companies, but letting them lead. In my view, and perhaps that's because of my background in the commercial world, governments can't create successful small companies that are going to be innovative and succeed on the world stage. That relies on individuals. All you can do is support those individuals and encourage them. Well, I think Colombia's, what's obvious already from just a short time on the ground in Colombia, is its greatest strength is its people. I mean, you have a young population, you have a large population, which brings huge opportunities. So you specialise to a degree, but I'm slightly cynical about countries trying to decide too much what will be successful and what not, and manage it from the centre looking down. I think there are obvious industries which in many cases are long-standing, such as your coffee industries, such as New Zealand's dairy industry, which we obviously want to ensure continue to succeed. So governments should make sure that their regulations and the infrastructure they provide is supportive of a competitive industry. But in terms of developing new industries, certainly in New Zealand the approach we've taken is to be more supportive of companies by encouraging that entrepreneurial spirit and encouraging the growth of good universities to develop the skills and letting those entrepreneurs go out and succeed. We haven't spent massive amounts of time thinking, well, we'll be big in software design. As it turns out, we are getting quite good at software design, but that's not because of the government, that's because of some key entrepreneurs who've realised they can operate successfully from a New Zealand base, and now the government helps that by encouraging more students to learn software design skills and so on. But the lead is taken by the individuals and by the companies. I think we all have natural areas of advantage. Wouldn't be much good us trying to grow coffee in New Zealand, for example. We're just not good at it. But I think we all have to look at the opportunities, but I think we have to push forward on a range of fronts. So in New Zealand's case, we have a large number of sectors that we seek to encourage, and some of them will succeed and some of them won't. But we don't want to be too restrictive as to the focus of government early on in this diversification process. So we have learned out of that the ICT sector, the software design, computer services sector, is something that New Zealanders are good at, and so we'll keep supporting that. We have fascinating examples of high-tech manufacturers who occupy very narrow economic niches but succeed on the world stage, which you would think is quite hard to do from New Zealand, but they do. And again, we seek to encourage them. But there are other industries that we're working to encourage that perhaps we may not necessarily succeed with. And I think that would be the approach I'd take in any country, would be to try and look at areas of potential specialisation, support those, and you may be surprised what actually transpires. Well, it's interesting actually. We export a lot of food and beverage, a lot of which goes into Asia, particularly China, but also Southeast Asia, and some into North America and Europe, and to some degree Latin America, particularly Chile. Then we have a number of ICT and high-tech manufacturing firms which tend to look towards the US and Europe as their markets more than, say, Asia at this point. And then we have education industry and tourism industry, which is much broader. Education tends to attract people from around the Pacific Rim. We have 100,000 international students each year, 25,000 from China, 18,000 from India, a few thousand from Latin America, several thousand from Southeast Asia and from North America. So that's a more of a sort of holistic around the Pacific Rim. And we see our long-term position, if you like, as very much a partner in the Pacific Rim, and with some links to Europe, particularly through the UK, which of course is our historic linkages. Well, I think you have to be prepared to fail, otherwise you're not going to be innovative. And certainly not every country, not every company succeeds. And if every company succeeds, you're probably not being innovative enough. So we have an organisation called Callaghan Innovation, which invests in R&D grants programs. And the chief executive of that organisation, a lady called Mary Quinn, she is fond of telling the media, expect failure. There will be some failures, because if you're not going to get some failures, then we aren't trying hard enough. And I think that's part of something that a country has to think about when it invests in this area. And don't forget, of course, that I think Henry Ford it was that failed a couple of times before he found that he could run a car company that could be successful. And there's plenty of examples through history of innovative individuals who failed on the first one or two occasions. And I think we all have to be accepting of that. Now that's a different sort of failure to some other failures, and you certainly shouldn't accept people doing things wrong. But in the cause of innovation, there's plenty of missteps. Well, I think the real strength is that innovation increases the value of products. And also reduces the dependence on commodity pricing. So we're all experiencing sudden changes in commodity pricing at the moment, whether it's oil or iron ore or dairy. And if you're a commodity exporter, then you're solely dependent on the world price for your product. But if you're in a highly processed food sector, then you can, to some degree, uncouple yourself from those swings of commodity prices, and you can extract more value. So the big international names, the Nestle's, the Danones, the Fonterras, and so on, have that ability to in the dairy industry to create value in their brands, which people buy, sort of irrespective of the commodity price. An obvious example being infant formula, which is a very high-tech product. It needs to be very well specced. It's approaching a health food as against a food in itself, and if it's done well, it commands a very strong premium. don't have a figure for the food and beverage sector with me. We spend overall about $1.5 billion in New Zealand a year, right across the sector, from discovery research through to research directly, assisting research in companies. So all those investments take place. We have probably 2 or 3 targeted investments at the moment. One of our national science challenges is high nutrition foods. It's a new challenge, and it's designed to explore the options for high nutrition foods and the validation of those foods, particularly for Asian markets, where there is a great interest in effectively in food for health. So we've set up a challenge with some of the best researchers from across New Zealand. We're looking to attract overseas partners as well, and really move the whole concept of health food to a new and more scientific level. So that's one area of work. A second area of work is in the food and beverage sector generally, and lifting the retail branding and marketing of some of New Zealand's foods, particularly the meat sector, which is again tended to be a bit commoditised, and we need our meat sector to be much more successfully branded and delivering high quality chilled product into some of the markets that we can easily reach. And now with further development of the airline industry, the ability to overnight fresh products, meat, fruit and so on, into world markets, even from New Zealand, which is reasonably remote, is actually quite easy to do. It's literally 1 12-hour flight. So these is another area of investment, and we also have a lot of investment in horticulture, particularly new strains of kiwi fruit, apples. The genetic investment, if you like, is quite significant. And what the Food Innovation Network is in a nutshell is the ability for small companies that don't have production facilities to conduct pilot development of products and small production runs to validate their products, but also for larger companies who don't want to take their production lines offline to experiment with a small run of a new product, which may or may not go anywhere. So effectively it's like a club facility which is shared amongst a series of manufacturers who purchase time at the facility rather than having to develop their own test and pilot facilities as well. So it's great for small companies, but also medium-sized companies that don't want to have the additional overhead and cost, and we just lease those facilities out. It's an interesting question because our food industry is much stronger for the subsidies having gone, actually, and that seems counterintuitive, but it's true. And I'll give you my best example of this because it's about both subsidies and market access too, because some industries seek protection because they're worried about imports coming in. So our best example was the New Zealand wine industry, which prior to the 1980s was not what you would call a very successful wine industry, and sold very cheap wine, very sugary wine based on grapes from Northern Europe, which were not necessarily the ideal grapes for New Zealand. And when we were developing our trade deals with Australia had a very good wine industry. And so the New Zealand industry wanted to be protected. They wanted to have protections from Australia, both in the terms of market access, but also assistance to succeed. They didn't get that, and the wine industry in New Zealand was opened up to competition. The result of that is one of the most successful New World wine industries in the world today. Faced with the challenge of being competed out of the market or succeeding, our wine industry and all the wine makers decided they had to get very, very good at their jobs, and they changed the grape varieties, they changed their style of production, they found new areas of cultivation, and they grew what was a tiny industry quite a big industry by New Zealand standards over the course of 15, 20 years, and now New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc and New Zealand Pinot Noir is known throughout the world as tremendous wine. Mm-hmm. That would never have happened if they had been protected. And it's a fascinating example, but the same applies to our dairy industry and our meat industry. If you have to be challenged to succeed, then you tend to find innovative ways of succeeding. And that's what's happened in this regard. Now, different countries have to take different approaches. That's over to those individual countries. All I can say is our experience is the less subsidised an industry in the longer term, the stronger it is. Well, look, I don't know the Colombian market well enough to be able to make a judgment on that. I think the challenge for all of the world's food and beverage industries remains the same, and we come from different positions, like different levels of experience. New Zealand's had longer, for example, in the dairy industry probably, and at a higher level. But the challenge for all those markets is the same: be innovative, develop high-value products which are defendable, which means branded products, develop markets well, and stay close to your consumers. And in the case of food and beverage, of course, food safety is critical, which means strong regulation. So the answer remains the same, I suspect, the world over. I just don't think I can make a judgment as to where Colombia is on the line of from one end to the other of the journey. But what I am confident about is a country like Colombia. You've got a tremendous resource of your people and a tremendous asset in terms of the land and the productivity of the land naturally. There's no reason why Colombia should not succeed. And encourage innovative people and innovative companies to get there.